moved on to theology proper, the doctrine of God. We saw that theology is the name given for the whole of the study of God and His works, which includes all the other doctrines. But the study of God itself is called theology proper. And we start with the existence and attributes of God. The existence and attributes of God. How does the Bible begin?
God.
Yeah, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, it doesn't explain and try to prove He exists. It just starts with God. No effort there to, in any way, prove it. It just states it. And we can see in that very opening statement, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. The rebuttal of so many different kinds of false philosophies and beliefs. For instance, right away, what would it do to atheism? It's the opposite, isn't it? Atheism is theism with the A in front of it, no God, atheist, no God. But it denies atheism by declaring the existence of God. Of course, even agnosticism. Agnosticism says there may be a God, but I'm not sure, we can't know Him. But it declares that there is a God who created the whole universe. Polytheism, what's that mean?
Many gods.
Many gods. How many gods created the universe?
One.
One. In the beginning, God, singular. Now, pantheism, what's pantheism?
God is in everything?
Yeah, everything is God, God is everything. There's different forms of it, but if you have creation and you subtract God in pantheism, you have nothing. And of course, that's true of theism too, isn't it? But if you have creation and you have God create and subtract creation, you don't have anything, because God is creation, creation is God. But the first verse of Genesis is, in the beginning, God created. So He existed apart from His creation, didn't He? He existed before creation, and He's separate from His creation. And then, of course, there's materialism, which is the basis for modern scientific theories of evolution and so on. Materialism says material is all there is. But this tells us that there'd be no material here if God didn't create it. So a little 5-year-old who believes Genesis 1:1 knows more than most philosophers and scientists as far as their cosmology and as far as their the realities. But it declares the existence of God. And we saw when you studied the Bible that really you study the Bible is the Word of God because it is God's Word. And so God gives the authority to the Bible. And so in one sense you should study the doctrine of God before you study the Bible, but you can't know who God is unless you study the Bible, because the Bible reveals God. So the authority of the Bible rests on the fact of God's existence. And so those of us who believe the Bible can then learn the truth about God, what we believe exists. In fact, a knowledge of God's existence and attributes is essential to faith, and faith is essential to pleasing God. Look at Hebrews 11 in verse 6. Hebrews 11 in verse 6. But without faith it is impossible to please God. Because he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. And so belief in the existence of God, and then trust in seeking that God and coming to know that God, is essential to pleasing God. And so our knowledge of God will then affect every other doctrine that we believe, and even our practice. It'll affect our view of sin and salvation. You see, if you don't get the doctrine of sin right, you won't get the doctrine of salvation right. Oh, yeah. And you can't get the doctrine of sin right until you get the doctrine of God right. Because sin is coming short of the glory of God. God defines sin. And therefore God also defines the salvation from sin. It'll affect our worship, won't it? And methods of service and labor. If you have a man-centered gospel, then you'll have one that emphasizes man, what man can do. If you have a God-centered gospel, then you have one that honors God, and you get what God can do. So your knowledge of God is essential then to your faith and your practice, which gives us an answer to what's really the biggest problem in our churches across the land.
Wrong view of God.
Yeah, the view of God, the doctrine of God. All right, Roman number 1, the existence of God. Number 1, the acceptance of the existence of God.
What was that? The existence of God, and then what was the number 1?
The acceptance of the existence of God. We saw that we must believe that He is. He's rewarded them that diligently seek Him. All right, we begin with this basic premise rather, that God exists. It's a presupposition. As you said, the Bible begins with the premise that God exists. God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible doesn't seek to prove He exists, but does it give us reasons why we should believe in Him? Of course, you'll see that it's logical, and we're without excuse if we don't believe in God. But the Bible assumes the existence of God from the beginning. Now this also gets to the point then that we have a propensity toward believing in God's existence. We have we have an inner bias, or a capacity and a propensity to believe in God. Because we were created in God's image. And the image of God enables us to know God and to know what God knows. Now look at Romans chapter 1. And look at verse 19. Because that which may be known of God is manifested in them, of course, in the creation. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, verse 21, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image like unto corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness. All right, so notice he said they knew God. Now, this is not a saving knowledge of God. We can say that the lost man does not know God. But in a sense, he does have a capacity to know God. And he should know God. And there's every reason why he should. And most people on the earth do believe in God in some sense, don't they? Now, they had created a God after their own image, as we see here. They made God in the likeness of man's lusts and man's desires. But the thought of the existence of a supreme being, men just know that. You have to really work at educating yourself out of that. An atheist has to really work hard to put God out of his thoughts. But Paul said here that men knew God. Of course, they did not honor him as God. And we'll see the reasoning, of course, is the fact that sin entered in it, and man rejects the light that God has given. But yet man is still responsible because he has a capacity and a propensity toward that. In other words, a disposition for belief in God. And of course, this is because he was created in the image of God. Genesis 1:26 and 27. In the image of God created he him. Man possesses innate cognitive equipment, belief-forming dispositions towards certain beliefs in the presence of certain experiences. Do that again. Man possesses innate cognitive equipment, belief-forming dispositions towards certain beliefs in the presence of certain experiences. We studied this already in the dealing with the Bible. God enabled man to know what he knows. Of course, not in the same fullness. God, of course, is omniscient and omnipresent and all-knowing and so on, but and infinite. But when you want to define truth, truth is knowing what God knows. Truth is seeing things as they really are, as God sees them. And so God's put that in man. In other words, these are inborn, innate principles within us. In fact, some believe that they are innate content of these beliefs is in us. Others believe that man just has a propensity toward them, and when he experiences them, then he realizes them. In other words, he recognizes them. Here are some of the things that man knows intuitively. Time and eternity. Space. Cause and effect. The law of non-contradiction. That's the first law of logic. A cannot be non-A under the same circumstances and so on. Even right and wrong, moral consciousness. Mathematical axioms. Beauty. Self-existence. Do you know you exist? Are you a figment of your imagination? You may wish you didn't. Like I said, I keep putting the escape button, but I'm still here. The existence of the external world. Are you really real out there? Or am I just imagining you? Are you a bad dream? Man knows that. Philosophers may go through all kinds of philosophical discussions as to why the external world exists or doesn't exist. And we say, what are you wasting your time on that for? I know that the external exists. And of course the existence of God. Look at Ecclesiastes 3:11.
Ecclesiastes what?
3:11. Ecclesiastes 3:11. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. The word world there is the Hebrew word olam. Olam. and it means extended time or eternity. When it talks about the eternal God, that's the word. What's the Arabic word for eternal or everlasting or time?
للأبد أبدي
Everything.
أبدي
That's a little different, I think.
عالم
Yeah.
عالم means world,
Uh-huh.
which is alam, so
Yeah.
similar to this.
It's close to it. In other words, you could translate this word, he has set eternity in their heart. He has set eternity in their heart. And it includes those things that we just mentioned.
Would that include every man?
Yeah, that's what God created, yeah. Includes every man. Let me just quote you from philosopher named Nash, who's quoting Platinga, another modern Reformed philosopher, who was making reference to Calvin. So this is somebody quoting somebody who's quoting somebody. But anyway, Reformed theologians such as Calvin have held that God has implanted in us a tendency or nisus to accept belief in God under certain conditions. Calvin speaks in this connection, let's see, of a, quote, sense of deity inscribed in the hearts of all, yeah, end of quote. Just as we have a natural tendency to form such beliefs under certain conditions, so, says Calvin, we have natural tendency to form such beliefs as God is speaking to me, and God has created all this, or God disapproves of what I've done under certain widely realized conditions. This is why universally all men have a tendency to believe in some kind of supernatural being. I just notice that there's that propensity, and when you have an experience, it kicks it into realization. Remember, it was Plato, who probably got from Socrates, that he said we saw all these ideas and when we in the world of ideas, and learning then is not learning something new, it's just remembering what you already know. Well, it's kind of a take on that, but the fact is that, for instance, if you never had a course in arithmetic, you would never know 2 + 2 = 4, or somebody explain the arithmetic numbers and things to you. But when you learn 2 + 2 = 4, something inside you says, I know that. In other words, you realize these mathematical axioms come into recognition when you come to experience them. And so a man in the world, he sees the stars and the moon and all the universe, and that kicks into his consciousness that there's somebody who made that. In other words, that triggers belief in God under certain conditions. He asked the question, why do not all men believe in God then? What's the answer to that?
They don't want to.
Pardon?
They don't want to believe.
Yeah,
God.
so what's that the reason?
Depravity.
Yeah, sin. Sin. Depravity. In other words, if man had not fallen, every man would believe in God. But because of sin, we have what's called the noetic effect of sin, from nous, the word for mind in Greek. In other words, if sin has affected man's mind, his foolish heart became darkened in sin. And we'll look at that passage again. But man has this innate intuitive disposition. Either it's an intuitive disposition or it's innate knowledge that's already there. There's two different views of that. They both come out to the same thing. Every basic desire man possesses has that which satisfies it. And so his need for God and his consciousness of God argues for the existence of such a one. Now let me quote again from Platinga. God has endowed us in such a way that we have a strong tendency or inclination toward belief in God. This tendency has been in part overlaid or suppressed by sin. Were it not for the existence of sin in the world, human beings would believe in God to the same degree and with the same natural spontaneity that we believe in the existence of other persons, an external world of the past. This is the natural human condition. It is because of our personal, unnatural, sinful condition that many of us find belief in God difficult or absurd. The fact is, Calvin thinks, one who does not believe in God is in a epistemically substandard position. In other words, he doesn't have all these marbles. That's a fancy way to say it. Epistemically, yeah. Epistemology is how do you know things. And so he's in as far as knowledge, in a substandard position. Rather like a man who does not believe that his wife exists, or thinks she is like a cleverly constructed robot and has her no thoughts, feelings, or consciousness. And so if a man really thought that about his wife, I think he'd probably get instructed or heard pretty soon that that's not the way to do it. And what does the Bible say? The fool has said in his heart,
There is no God.
there is no God. So the Bible speaks of a fool, of a man who does not believe in God as a fool. He's has a mentally substandard position. And of course, that passage applies to every sinner. If you just continue on. Now, many sinners believe in God, but as far as their own life, no God for me. I make a God of my liking, after my desires, and after my lusts. And so all men in their fallen condition reject the true God, but yet they know there is a God to reject. So there's really no need for proofs of God's existence, for belief in God is, for belief in God to be rational. Well, then should we not use proofs of God's existence? In other words, are we to use the various standard proofs of God's existence? There's some who maybe ridicule them among, especially Reformed men. But they have their place. Again, I'll quote Nash. All kinds of things can function as triggering conditions that in conjunction with our belief-forming disposition can produce immediate and non-inferentially the belief in God's existence. In other words, the argument for the existence of God is rational, and therefore it could well trigger in a man's mind belief that he might not have before. And this is no doubt what the preacher in Ecclesiastes meant in Ecclesiastes 3:11. And so arguments can be used of God to help trigger that. But of course, God himself has to do the final proof, doesn't he? He has to do the final convincing. And sometimes that, I read of one author who speaks of being in a car with a group of people, and there's one young lady there who was agnostic as to the belief in God. And they're speeding along, and they hit a patch of ice, and the car started going around in circles. And this agnostic young lady said, "Oh, Jesus, save us." And so that little experience triggered in her a belief in the supernatural. Like I say, there's no atheists in foxholes and so on.
Yeah.
So Right, and number two, arguments for God's existence. Right, so it is rational to believe in God. It's irrational not to. But why then do man reject the knowledge of God? Well, first of all, the rejection of God's evidence. Let's go back to Romans 1. Starting with verse 18, Romans 1, 18 to 21. He has pointed out that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation, and that in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, but also that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. Verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Now, he's not talking here about hell. He's not talking about final judgment. He's saying that right now in man is under the wrath of God. And why? Because he has suppressed the truth in unrighteousness. Now the word hold there is the Greek word kateo. Sorry. Kateo. Echo means to have or hold, kata means down. That can mean hold, but also can mean suppress. And so he's saying here that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth, who hold back the truth in unrighteousness, who resist the truth in unrighteousness. All right, so men are not in darkness because they don't have any light. But why are they in darkness? Because they suppress the light, reject the light. And the wrath of God is upon them. And he explains then what that means in the following verses, that he's given them up to uncleanness, to vile affections, to a reprobate mind. Now why is this so? Look at verse 19. Because that which may be known of God is manifested in them. That was manifested in all men, in the man. For God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him, of God, from the creation of the world, from creation on, are clearly seen. In other words, God is saying, the evidence of my existence and my presence and so on, and my power, is clearly revealed in creation. We call that general revelation, didn't we study that? General revelation. That God revealed himself through creation. It's general because it's everywhere and it affects everybody. So the visible things are revealed by the things that are visible. And notice what's revealed. Even are being understood by the things that are made. Even his eternal power and Godhead. The word there means actually God-likeness, divinity, divinity, God-likeness. So man can know from creation that there's a powerful creator and certain things about the creator, so that they are without excuse. If a man never saw a Bible, never saw a missionary, he'd still be judged before God and condemned before God because of the light of creation that he is rejecting. They're without excuse. Why are they without excuse? Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful. Notice the first thing that they're not glorifying God, they were not thankful for what God had provided for them. But became vain, empty in their imagination, and their foolish heart was darkened. professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And changed, literally exchanged, the glory of the incorruptible God for an image made like unto corruptible man, and the birds and the four-footed beasts and creeping things. Notice the devolution there of worshiping lower creatures. Wherefore God also gave them up unto uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God, who exchanged the truth of God into literally the lie. And what's the lie? That creation is God. That we are God. Remember, that's what the temptation of Satan was. If you take that fruit, you'll be like God. So he changed the truth of God into a lie, or the lie, and worshipped and served the creature, or the creation, more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And for this cause God then gave them up unto vile affections, and so on. In other words, this rejection of the light of God and exchanging of the truth of God for unworthy objects of worship affected their moral life, because we become what we worship. We become what we worship. And so we see that God didn't give... Here's the wrath of God. This is the judgment. When God leaves a man up to himself and leaves him have his sin in his way. The judgment of God is that they wanted to live without God, so God let them. They wanted sin, so God let them have their sin. Worst thing God could let you do is have your own way. So there you see the devolution. And of course, history is going to come to the time when Antichrist is going to be setting himself up as God. And what does it say in 2 Thessalonians 2? That men will believe the lie. And Antichrist is God, or man epitomized in Antichrist is God. And so we see this is going to come to full circle even in the end. So men knew God by general revelation, not to be confused with saving knowledge. And so man, made in the image of God, now as fallen, makes gods in his image. So God made man in his image, now men made gods in their image. And so men reject this knowledge and evidence of God's existence. They don't want the God that is revealed in creation. All right, second then, the reasonableness of God's existence. Now, the fact that men suppress the general revelation does not take away from the fact that God counts the evidence of creation as sufficient to prove its existence. They may argue against the effectiveness of using the traditional arguments for God's existence, arguing from effect back to cause. But according to verse 21, or actually verse 20, God counts that as a sufficient argument. And men are not excused because they have rejected the reasonableness of that. Beside an inclination to belief in God that is part of his innate cognitive equipment, there's also the belief in such first truths as the law of non-contradiction and the law of cause and effect. And so the argument of Romans 1 is that the creation, which is an effect, demands logically a creator or an uncaused cause. You have to ask, well, where did it all come from? Everything else we know that comes into existence or is made by somebody. Like the argument about the watch. If you found a watch out in the middle of the field and you find it ticking and telling time, you wouldn't believe that that just came there by natural causes. You know that there was a watchmaker. Now, down through history, there have been various arguments made for the existence of God. We're just going to touch on these traditional arguments. First is the cosmological argument. Okay. Now, the one that made these arguments popular was Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world. Literally a orderly arrangement. It can mean the created world, or it could mean the people who live on it. God so loved the world, and so on. It could be an evil system. Satan is the god of this world, or he is the prince of this world. So, cosmological means then that it's an a posteriori argument, where you argue from the effect back to the cause. So the argument is this, that the world being a contingent effect. By contingent, we mean that this world can not be. You cannot be. You are not self-existent. And so this contingent effect must have a cause. And that cause must be self-existent. Of course, there are different things this argument can't tell you. It doesn't tell you that the cause is infinite or all powerful. He just may be more powerful enough to create this. But then the question comes, how did that cause come to be? It must have had a cause. And then that cause must have had a cause. And you keep on going back, and it's illogical to have an infinite regress. There had to be somewhere that the buck stops, that there's a cause. So you have to have the Word of God to make sense of this argument, but the fact that the argument has a logical point of view. If something exists, something has always had to exist. Is that right or wrong?
That's right.
If nothing exists, if there's a time in the past when nothing existed, then what would be now?
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So if something exists, something had to always exist. Now you can account. Excuse me. How can you account for what exists? Well, one answer is it's an illusion. An illusion. Hinduism believes that the world is an illusion. But you have to account for, first of all, who's having the illusion? Are you an illusion too, having an illusion? So you have to account for the illusion. How does it come about? How do you account for the one having it? Where did he or she come from who had the illusion? Now there's another view, which is basically what materialism teaches, that it's self-created. But is that logical? Can something be self-created? See, they got their big bang, and finally they get to that point where you got that little tiny speck of energy that exploded into everything you see. But the question is, where did that come from? And, and there are those who actually teach self-creation, but it's an absurdity. See, for something to create itself, it had to exist before it was created. It had to be before it became. And how could you be before you existed? See? And so it could not be self-created. It means it would have to be and not be at the same time. And what does that violate? What's the first law of logic?
Contradiction.
Yeah, the law of contradiction or non-contradiction, either way you say it. So if something cannot be and not be at the same time, it's a contradiction. Now the idea of an infinite regress of finite causes, this cause created this, this was created by this cause, is really another version of self-creation. Things had to start sometime. Everything that we experience in the universe is temporal, it's contingent. It's all dependent on something else. Nothing in the universe is self-existent. So everything that exists is an effect that demands a cause. For every effect must have a cause, else it would not be an effect. And there's some who argue that every everything must have a cause. And then they say, well, then God must have a cause. But that's not what the law says. It doesn't say everything must have a cause. Every effect must have a cause. And so, when we come to talk about the universe and God, this cause then must be an uncaused cause, or a necessary being. See, we are contingent beings. God is a necessary being. We can not be, but God cannot not be. He's self-existent. He cannot not be. Now, if you argue that one part of the universe is self-existent and create the rest of it, what you're really saying, and that part's God. Anytime you come up with a concept of a necessary being, self-existent, then you're talking about the concept of God. Now, certainly won't necessarily be the biblical God, and you're never going to come to the idea of a biblical God just by logic. But the fact that there is a God is certainly logical. Then the other argument is called the teleological argument. It's also kind of a cause and effect argument. Now, this comes from the Greek word telos. Which means end or goal or purpose. Now, this view postulates that a world filled with every evidence of design, intelligent design demands an intelligent designer. So not just that you have a world and there's a cause, there's the creator, it's cosmological, but then you get a little fine-tune that. What does this world tell us? It seems like it has design and purpose to it. Now the only other alternative to this is the materialistic evolutionary view that all this came by chance. which kind of stretches the credulity when you think of all the intricacies and there's scientists are discovering worlds beyond worlds that way, and then they're going in the other direction, finding whole universes are just in the little cell. And one of the movements today is called the intelligent design movement. And it has it doesn't start with the Bible as creationists. In fact, they kind of shy away from the word creationist because they get bombarded with it anyhow. But the view is that there is scientific evidence that there is design in creation, especially when you come to the in the biological level of the cell, where you have all of this DNA that is actually a computer program that tells you that you end up being a person rather than a hippopotamus or something, or a fish. And in other words, it's all programmed, and it's way beyond anything Microsoft has come up with yet. Well, if you have a program, it's a language, isn't it? And what does language denote? Intelligence. Somebody has to write the program. And so there's every evidence, not only that, but just look at all the different animals, how they're designed to survive, and look at your own body and your own mind, and the fact that you not only have a physical miracle, you might say, but also they have the soul you have, and so on. All of that just doesn't come by chance. They say give enough time, billions of years and chance, and all this just can happen. Well, that certainly is illogical. And so, because there's design in the universe, what does that tell us about the Creator? There must be a designer, which means an intelligent designer. In fact, there's a personal cause stamped plainly on the world everywhere. You can also add the anthropological argument. These are the two basic ones. Anthropological and also the moral argument. What is anthropological? What's anthropos mean?
Man.
Man, yeah. The argument is that that man can think, can feel, and has a will, and he has moral consciousness. Well, the idea here is that the Creator must be greater than the product, and so if we have a mind, God must have a mind. If we have a moral consciousness, there must be a moral governor of the universe. If we have all these various faculties of intelligence, then there must be an intelligent God who created all these. These things just don't come up. There's no way to account for them by chance, evolutionary processes, materialistic process. Material cannot produce laws. It can't produce logic. It can't produce even language. It was Immanuel Kant who felt that he kicked out and kicked God out the one door by his critique of pure reason, but then he brought him in the back door by his critique of practical reason, saying that you cannot have morality and you cannot have morality without a God. And so he brought God in the backward to his moral argument, which is anthropological. But of course, everybody since Immanuel Kant, the intellectual world, had forgotten about that argument. They just left God out. If you kicked him out, they just leave him. Now there's also an argument called the argument of congruity. There's actually also the Christological. Which of course is from the Word of God. How do you account for the Lord Jesus Christ, who claims to be God manifest in the flesh? How do you account for the fact that he performed miracles and he rose from the dead and all these things? But the argument of congruity is this, that even though one argument may not be sufficient, has its weaknesses, you put them all together and they add to a argument of the existence of God, the proof of God's existence. Like a detective investigating a number of clues, and they all add up enough evidence to arrest a criminal and convict them. See? This bit of evidence may not be enough, and this may not be, but you put them all together. They put the cosmological, the teleological, the anthropological, the Christological, all together, and the only key that fits all that is belief in God. And so the idea of congruity, God's existence is the key that fits all metaphysical locks. We need to recognize, though, that arguments and reasonings, however, do not bring men to a personal knowledge of God, but can lead into a knowledge of his existence. But yet, all these arguments by reason cannot tell us what kind of a God he is, and so on. So we must have special revelation. The revelation that God has become man, and it said we beheld his glory, the glories of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. No man has seen God at any time, but the only begotten Son who's in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. And so God has been revealed in human flesh. 1 Corinthians 1:21, the world by wisdom knew not God. The world by wisdom knew not God. So all the philosophical arguments still doesn't bring a man to really know God. And as I said, there are scholars who have a negative response to the whole idea of natural theology and proofs of God's existence. But what they do prove, really, not as absolute proofs of God's existence, but the fact that it's reasonable. In fact, that's all a good argument can do is show something is reasonable. It's rational, not irrational. So though it's rational to believe in the existence of God, and a man is a fool who says there is no God, still man cannot come to a vital knowledge of God by reason alone. This, of course, is by special revelation and the incarnation of Jesus Christ and the witness of the Holy Spirit. Spurgeon said, the old saying is, go from nature to nature's God. But it's hard work going uphill, he said. The best thing to do is go from nature's God down to nature. And if you once get to nature's God and believe in him and love him, it's surprising how easy it is to hear music in the waves and songs in the wild whispers of the wind and to see God in everything. My friend and we went to Bible college together, we were roommates. He was saved listening to the old-fashioned revival hour on the radio years ago. I don't know if you've ever heard of Charles Ford. Well, his brother-in-law started listening, and he was converted, same way. He worked for Timken Axle in Detroit, and he went down this same street when he parked his car for years. But this Monday after he got saved on Sunday, listening to the old-fashioned revival hour, Monday he started walking down the street and he got lost. He didn't recognize there were trees with birds and things on it. In other words, his eyes were open up to creation, and creation is God. He had a whole view, just like the song how colors are sweeter green and so on when we come to know him. So he was open to nature because he came to know nature's God. It was funny, he got lost, he couldn't find his way to his job. But that shows what starting with Christ and the Word of God does. And God's transforming us. Okay, we'll move on then to Roman numeral 2 and stop pretty close here. The attributes of God. The attributes of God. This is something lives in every view Christless eyes have never seen. Number one, the definition of the attributes of God.
Attributes, how can you spell that, Bob?
Attributes. Attributes of God. In other words, we attribute certain qualities to God that define him. God is known by the attributes by which he can be defined. God is known by the attributes by which he can be defined. Now, though God is a transcendent being, what we mean by God is transcendent. What is something that transcends? What's it sound like? God is transcendent.
He's above everything?
Yeah, he's above everything. So here's his creation. Pantheism says God is immanent, that he's in creation, but he's not transcendent. Transcendent means that God is above. Now, what do you mean by God is above? What direction's heaven? Up? Okay, suppose you're in China, what direction is heaven?
Oh.
In the opposite direction, isn't it? So if you're China then living in America, heaven to you would be down. No. So we're plainly not talking about physical direction when we say that God is above. Right? Though the Bible does speak of God's throne being in the north. But it means that his is another dimension above this dimension. And can God be comprehended fully? No, he's incomprehensible. Job 11:7, let's look at that. If you got a God you can figure out, then you don't have the right God. He's a product of your imagination. Job 11:7. Where's Job 11:7? Canst thou by searching find out God? Can thou find out the Almighty unto perfection? Of course, what's the answer to those questions? No. Romans 11:33. Oh, the depths of the riches both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. So even though God is incomprehensible and transcendent, He has revealed Himself in His creation, as we've seen, and in the incarnation of His Son, and in the Scriptures. And He's done so in understandable language. Charles Hodge said, God really is what we believe Him to be, so far as our idea of Him is determined by the revelation that He has made of Himself. God really is what we believe Him to be, so far as our idea of Him is determined by the revelation that He has made of Himself.
Can you hear that one more time, Doc?
Okay? God really is what we believe Him to be, so far as our idea of Him is determined by the revelation that He has made of Himself. So if your concept of God is biblical, then that's what God is like. Now let me give you Millard Erickson's definition of the attributes of God. When we speak of the attributes of God, we are referring to those qualities of God which constitute what He is. They are the very characteristics of His nature. When we speak of the attributes of God, we are referring to those qualities of God which constitute what He is. They are the very characteristics of His nature. In other words, that's what I believe when we talk about the attributes of God. So in other words, we say God is omnipresent. That means He's everywhere present. God is omnipotent, He's all-powerful. God is omniscient, He's all-knowing. God is holy, He's perfectly pure and righteous. God is righteous, God is love. These are attributes that are qualities that constitute what He is. They're characteristics of His nature. Okay, we'll stop there.